As the nation moves forward with vote by mail across the country, many states are facing great scrutiny with how they're going about it as corruption concerns abound. We're going to dive into some of these lawsuits with an attorney who is tackling them head on. Phill Kline, former Attorney General of the state of Kansas. You're on Jimmy at the Crossroads with Jimmy Sengenberger in partnership with the Washington Examiner, which starts right now.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome once again to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program. Once again, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. And by the way, if you have not done so, please be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads, and to follow our partners at the Examiner at WashingtonExaminer.com. And by the way, our show website is JimmyAtTheCrossroads.com. It is so great to be with you today, especially amidst this election season where we have early voting happening, the expansion of vote by mail. We've talked a lot about that here on this program, being that I'm from Colorado, the third state to implement universal mail balloting. But one thing that has been deeply concerning to me and to us on this program has been the fact that many states across the country have been rushing forward with implementing vote by mail systems without being ready for it. It took Colorado well over a decade to be in position in 2014 to make the switch to universal mail balloting. And that's why there are some lawsuits going on in several states challenging the practices of those states as they rush forward with these types of systems. I'm so pleased today to be joined by an attorney who is handling 4 of these lawsuits. Running the Amistad Project for the Thomas More Society is the former Attorney General of the great state of Kansas and also a law professor at Liberty University. Phill Kline joins us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Sir, welcome. Good to have you.
It's great to be here, Jimmy. I love the music that you opened up with. That is fun.
Why, thank you. Enjoyed my harmonica playing?
Yeah, that was you?
Yes, it was.
Tremendous.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's fun.
I have to say, though, it does kind of look like today you're the one who's at the crossroads, not me.
Well, as you saw a moment ago when we were speaking before the show started, I had a train parked right behind me. And it sounded and looked as if it wasn't going to leave, but fortunately, God or whomever prevailed and moved it on down the track. So I can hear you well.
We were both concerned that your governor, Ralph Northam, had pulled the plug on these trains, but apparently he had, and he allowed it to continue, so that was a good thing.
Yes.
All right. So I'm so pleased to have you on because this issue of vote by mail is something a lot of people are very attuned to across the country. I've been watching it with great interest given Colorado's own experience here. I've got some audio from the debate the other night that we're going to want to play, but I want to start from the top, which is your overall sense for how states are implementing vote by mail and what you guys are doing as far as these lawsuits, and then we'll really dive in.
Okay. Extraordinarily poorly. Vote by mail is complex for a lot of different reasons. But as you know, in Colorado, one of the reasons that we're concerned about when the ballot leaves the hands of the polling place and trained election officials is there's no one to be there to prevent coercion, to prevent intimidation, or to prevent somebody committing fraud and filling out the ballot who is not the voter themselves. And most of these states have absentee ballot laws, Jimmy. And they are designed to protect the integrity of the ballot. They might require a witness to witness the person voting, or they might require a signature on the outside of the ballot envelope that when the ballot comes in, election workers are trained to compare that signature to a signature on file to make sure it was the actual voter who voted. Now, there's two problems with what's happening. One of them is that these states who aren't prepared to handle a mammoth amount of absentee ballots and count them, they don't have the trained signature comparison folks, they don't have the people to work on election night to be able to count the ballots, are going to be overwhelmed. Secondly, blue state governors particularly are setting aside laws to protect ballot integrity in these states. They're saying COVID makes it a danger to have a witness to the absentee ballot. I believe that argument is absurd, but they're eliminating the witness requirements. They're saying COVID makes it difficult to get the ballot back on time, and to require that it be postmarked or in the election office. So we're going to hire people to drive around and harvest ballots, when that is against state law because of concern about ballot integrity. Now, on top of that, our litigation relates to this. You are seeing blue state governors shut down in-person polling. And all the data reveals that Republicans prefer to vote in person. But it's becoming more difficult than it has been in a generation to vote in person. Meanwhile, they are saying you must vote by mail, and they are taking private funds from Mark Zuckerberg, and they're expanding the effort to vote in jurisdictions that turned out to vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016. So in Philadelphia, for example, a swing state that's going to come very tight in the presidential election, out in the rural area where President Trump is expected to do well, it's hard to vote. But in the city, they actually have mobile units now, in violation of state law, but they're saying COVID justifies it, using Mark Zuckerberg money to drive around and pick up ballots from people. That's a concern. Whenever government targets a demographic to turn out the vote and targets another demographic to suppress the vote, you have unlawful behavior by government. Wow. It's stuffing money in the umpire's pocket before they call the first strike, and it's undermining the integrity of our elections.
So you said a lot there, and I want to peel back the onion and break it down with you, Phill Kline, our guest, from the director of the Amistad Project at the Thomas More Society, which is handling lawsuits in 4 different states over these particular concerns. First, I want to go to your point that was just so stunning to me about how a lot of these states are now advantaging vote by mail and trying to enhance that and rush that through, by the way, while disadvantaging those who want to use the traditional vote in person model. I thought their objective was to maximize the opportunity for voters to get out and participate. It seems like they want to rush the one area that could be highly problematic and dissuade people from voting in the way that has, in many of these states in particular, been the one way to go, and the way that they've built up trust in this sense of election integrity. My understanding
that's right. And they're using COVID fear. They're saying don't vote in person, don't vote in person. Plus they're encouraging the shutdown of in-person polling place. They're putting new requirements on it that are almost impossible to meet. And then they're taking private money, and that's a real concern. Private money should not be used in elections. Mm-hmm. We can't privatize our elections. They're using private money wherever that private organization wants to put it to enhance the vote. And so far, all that private money has gone to areas where Hillary Clinton got over 75% of the vote in 2016. So they're turning out the Clinton vote for Biden, and they're using government to do it. That's the problem.
And let's talk.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Jimmy.
I was just going to say, let's talk a bit specifically about this Center for Tech and Civic Life, CTLC, that Mark Zuckerberg and other tech giant executives and companies are giving funding to. They're giving grants to communities, but also giving grants to select communities, not, for example, to the state, for the state to then dole out to communities across their territory.
Can you hear me okay? I'm sorry, the train is back.
Yes. Yes, you're fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Here's the problem with what they're doing. Every state has an election plan. And in that election plan, they are required by law to address the needs of all voters equally. What's happening now, though, is Zuckerberg is bypassing the state. He is picking where it's going to be easy to vote, and therefore allowing it to be harder to vote in other areas. So that is the problem. We are treating voters differently. If Zuckerberg wanted to give money to the Democrat Party, he could do it. It just wouldn't be a tax deduction. So this is wrong.
Yeah, that's a good point about tax deductible contributions in effect. So these lawsuits. So these lawsuits are happening in 4 different states on the part of filed and being spearheaded by the Amistad Project at the Thomas More Society. And one thing that's so important about these suits is that they are really focusing in on the practices in these states that are, I would say, even very much corrupt in nature. I mean, the idea that you are getting funding from a private organization for particular communities and areas is deeply disturbing. But the states that are particularly being addressed here include Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Those are 2 of the states, and those are 2 critical states as well when we're talking the trajectory of this election and what could end up happening. Also, in terms of some of these practices of vote by mail, we've talked on this program a lot about concerns regarding the safety of these ballots and the security issues in untested states. As mentioned before, Colorado implemented universal mail balloting in 2013, 2014. And I would say that it has been a success overall, particularly because we had prepared for it over about 15 years getting ready for universal mail balloting and consistently improving the system. We have states across the country, and Phill Kline knows this being the attorney who is spearheading these 4 lawsuits, states across the country that really are moving full speed ahead and with systems that are devoiding voters of the confidence in the process, which Phill Kline is absolutely critical if we're going to be able to trust the electoral outcome.
Absolutely. And when you see a private person whose partisanship is known pouring $250 million into local election offices to turn out the vote, when there's one demographic that's dominant, for example, in Detroit, where Hillary Clinton won 93% of the vote in 2016 to make it easier to vote, it undermines the integrity of the election. Imagine this, if you would, Jimmy. Imagine if the NRA, the National Rifle Association, announced, we're going to put $250 million into this election, but we're not going to give it to candidates or anything. We're going to go buy county election offices where the Second Amendment is supported by over 80% of the electorate, and we're going to have our volunteers be hired by the county to go out and help people fill out their ballot and pick up that ballot and turn it in to make sure that they vote. There would be an outcry across America that would have drowned out the train that was behind me, and the screaming would still be going on. This purchasing of local elections undermines the integrity of the office of the elections. That's why we've sued in 4 states. We're suing in 4 more tomorrow. There's Zuckerberg money that's popping up everywhere to do this, where Hillary Clinton did well in the election.
And so what are all the states so far? The 4, I mentioned Pennsylvania and Wisconsin as 2 of them. What are the other 2? And can you tell us what you'll be filing the next phase of the lawsuit in the other 4 states?
Michigan, Minnesota, South Carolina, Georgia, Texas, and Iowa.
So in these states, one of the concerns that you have filed or included in these lawsuits are over Dropboxes. And I'm curious your thoughts on that, because I have only voted in Colorado via Dropbox. I didn't trust the mail, not because of Trump, not because of DeJoy and those ridiculous conspiracy theories. But going back to 2014, I just don't trust the Postal Service to get my mail from point A to point B when it's election mail. So I've always voted in Dropboxes. I feel comfortable with the Dropbox system in Colorado because you have 2 election judges that are able to go and pick these up with bipartisan. And also you have 24 hours camera surveillance of each of the Dropboxes, at least in Colorado. My sense is that that's not the case in a heck of a lot of these states that are putting Dropboxes in place.
Well, there's several things. First, let me address your concern about the post office and the hue and cry we're now getting from the left about how terrible the post office is. In 2019, the Inspector General of the United States did a review of 5 years of post office performance from 2013 through 2018. So the majority of that performance was under President Obama. And what they concluded is that the post office only met on-time delivery goals 13% of the time. 13% of the time. That was presented to Congress last year. So this sudden concern about the post office on the left that somehow they're going to suppress the mail is absurd. The post office has always been challenged. So you're right to hesitate about the post office. About Dropboxes specifically, you're right in that Colorado and other states who have allowed vote by mail have specific rules that make and provide greater integrity there that these other states do not have and don't have in place. And furthermore, they have eliminated other laws that when the ballot is received, they are necessary to verify that the voter filled out that actual ballot, such as signature comparison.
Yes.
They're eliminating that. So therefore, the Dropboxes have additional vulnerabilities because they don't have a postmark on it and because there's no way under how they're implementing the system to verify that the voter is the one who filled out the ballot. That's the problem with Dropboxes in states with no experience.
I want to underscore the point about signature verification, Phill Kline, because former Colorado Secretary of State Wayne Williams joined me on Jimmy at the Crossroads several weeks ago. One of the things that we talked about was how the Democrat bill in the United States House of Representatives was doing what it could to eliminate signature verification requirements in states that had them, which shows that their interest is not particularly in election integrity. It is simply in moving forward with a vote-by-mail system that may not be something that the voters can count on, which is deeply troubling. It's an essential component of the security that Colorado has had, making it the gold standard, as our current Secretary of State, a Democrat, likes to highlight. And as Democrats, when they point to vote-by-mail states, they point to Colorado, yet they don't want to use the things in this state that have made it secure.
That's right. And you see a lot of undermining of those protections, and that is deeply concerning. And in addition, this claim by the media that there's no evidence of voter fraud dealing with absentee ballots is just flat out false. A Jimmy Carter and Jim Baker panel that was formed in 2004 came out with a report that highlighted how absentee balloting and mail-in balloting is the place where most election fraud occurs. The Heritage Foundation has a database of over 1,000 people who have been charged and then later convicted of election fraud and voter fraud. So there is, look, since the first elections in ancient Greece, there were efforts to cheat. So states have put in place certain rules that help prevent that and identify it. And now what you see are leftist governors saying those rules don't matter because of COVID. And I want to share one other thing with you, Jimmy, to give you an example of how absurd this becomes. There's a lawsuit down in the South where it is a plaintiffs group that includes a Harvard graduate who's 25 years old, who says, look, COVID makes me fearful to go to the post office. COVID makes me hesitate to even reach out to learn how much postage is necessary on an absentee ballot, and I might be confused. So the Constitution requires that these ballots be mailed out, postage return already paid by the state. That's the type of stuff we're getting under COVID to set aside clear state laws to protect the integrity of the election. And it's sad to see.
Yeah, especially when you're using a crisis to weaken the trust and confidence that voters can have in the outcome. That leads to deep concerns. President Trump, in his debate the other night with Joe Biden, their first time going mano a mano on stage in front of the American people, he expressed concerns over voter fraud. Here's a taste of that.
As far as the ballots are concerned, it's a disaster. A solicited ballot, okay, solicited is okay. You're soliciting, you're asking, they send it back, you send it back. I did that. If you have an unsolicited, they're sending millions of ballots all over the country. There's fraud. They found them in creeks. They found some with the name Trump, just happened to have the name Trump just the other day in a waste paper basket. They're being sent all over the place. They sent 2 in a Democrat area. They sent out 1,000 ballots. Everybody got 2 ballots. This is going to be a fraud like you've never seen. The other thing, it's nice on November 3rd, you're watching and you see who won the election. And I think we're going to do well because people are really happy with the job we've done. But you know what? We won't know. We might not know for months because these ballots are going to be all over. Take a look at what happened in Manhattan. Take a look at what happened in New Jersey. Take a look at what happened in Virginia and other places. They're not losing 2%, 1%, which, by the way, is too much. An election could be won or lost with that. They're losing 30 and 40%. It's a fraud, and it's a shame. And can you imagine where they say you have to have your ballot in by November 10th? November 10th. That means that's 7 days after the election, in theory, should have been announced.
Okay.
We have major states with that.
Sir?
There's a lot there, Phill Kline, director of the Amistad Project at the Thomas More Society. But one thing that really struck me is his observations that really undercut the Democrats' arguments as far as Colorado's system. I mean, there are a lot of things that we have had in place here that are just being completely disregarded elsewhere around the country. And I think some of what he was saying there helped to underscore that particular point. And yet they are getting away with this argument that there's no such thing as fraud and vote by mail because they're looking at systems where you've had the greatest success rate, and only that, even though we've had many years to prepare.
Yeah, that's right. And as a part of that, Colorado does a pretty good job of making sure that its voter rolls are actually reflective of people who are qualified to vote. That's one of the most important things you can do if you're voting by mail. And what the president is speaking about, when you decide, contrary to state law in these other states, to just mail out ballots to whoever is on the rolls and registered, you're going to mail out up to 1/8 to 30% of your ballots will go to people who have moved or people who have died or people who are not eligible to vote. And in fact, there's been studies about how poorly maintained these voting rolls are. So you have to understand, and if you go back to the Nevada primary just this year, there is a testimony from a postal worker who said that they found these ballots stacked up on the sidewalk outside of apartment complexes because people have moved. Just recently, Project Veritas in Minneapolis released undercover video of people running around with 300 or more absentee ballots, and they would fill them out and sell them to candidates. These ballots going out, you have to control the ballot. You have to have records that have integrity. And what the president is complaining about is those states that don't have experience are just mailing them out. And these ballots end up in the wrong hands. Yeah. And on the backside, they're eliminating protections to ensure that it was the voter that completed the ballot. That is a formula for disaster, and it's being done intentionally.
That point you raised, Phill Kline, about voter rolls and making sure that they are consistently updated is absolutely critical. We had two Republican secretaries of state here in Colorado, Scott Gessler and then Wayne Williams, who implemented this vote-by-mail system and put it into effect. And that was one of the things that they wanted to make sure was done, was a verifiable process for voters who are eligible to vote to be those on the rolls and to consistently clean them and maintain those databases. That is absolutely critical. I want to play one more clip here from the debate as we wrap up with you, Phill Kline, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, former Attorney General of Kansas. And that is Joe Biden. I caught him in a lie that I don't think I noticed anybody else observed. I'm sure there are many lies that he was telling in the course of the debate, but one in particular about universal mail balloting that especially caught my attention. I tweeted out about it, but here's what Joe Biden said.
This is not going to end well. This is not going to end well.
5 states have had mail-in ballots for the last decade or more. 5, including 2 Republican states. And you don't have to solicit the ballot. It's sent to you. It's sent to your home. What they're saying is that it has to be a postmark by election day. If it doesn't get in till the 7th, 8th, 9th, it still should be counted. He's just afraid of counting the votes because
you're wrong. You're wrong.
I want to continue.
So 2 points here. Number one, he said there are 5 states that had mail-in ballots for a decade or more. That is completely false. Colorado switched to a universal vote-by-mail system. It was the third state to do so. In 2013, we started making that switch. I don't know about you. I could do a little bit of math, but that's not a decade ago, Phill Kline, number one. And that was the third state to implement. Definitely not a decade or more. If anything, it took a decade or more to be able to implement these vote-by-mail systems effectively. The other thing is when he was saying, oh, they need to be postmarked by Election Day so they can be received within however many days after. One other thing that Colorado highlighted as the gold standard for vote by mail does is it requires that ballots be received by 7 p.m. on Election Day. Not postmarked by 7 p.m. on Election Day, Phill Kline, but received by county clerks and recorders by 7 p.m. That does mean that you can go and put them into the Dropbox, but they at least need to be in the location of the voting so they can be counted by 7 p.m. Yet they completely ignore those kinds of things.
That's right, Jimmy. And it's great that you point that out. Many people don't realize this. And I'm sorry. I want to apologize, first of all, by where I am and what's happened with this train and everything. I apologize for that.
It was a beautiful day out there.
I will be in an office next time we speak, so you don't have to deal with this. I apologize. But think about this. You go back to the Lyndon Johnson Democrat primary when he was running for the U.S. Senate in Texas. There were votes that didn't show up on Election Day. And on Election Day, suddenly the candidates learn how many votes that they need. And so all of a sudden, all this black box shows up. And it has just the number of votes that then Congressman Johnson needed to win the Senate primary in Texas. So if you allow certain areas in swing states to say, well, we're not done counting yet, but here's all the results nationally, here's how far somebody is behind.
Oh, Phill Kline, you just cut out for a second there, sir.
Yes, if somebody knows how many votes they need to win, and they're the last person with the authority to count votes after all the other votes are counted, what do you think's going to happen? What ballots are going to show up after Election Day?
So
that's the problem.
Let me ask you a final fundamental question. Regardless of how the lawsuits pan out that the Amistad Project is spearheading at Thomas More Society in these 8 states that we've identified, particularly relative to the Center for Tech and Civic Life situation that where they're funding this private company or private organization funded in part by the likes of Mark Zuckerberg is identifying particular areas for additional election funding for particular types of activities. Regardless of how that outcome comes, what comes from that and some of these other lawsuits, Phill Kline, what do you think is going to be the case after Election Day as far as the sense for trust and confidence in the outcome? Because there's a lot of question about whether or not the results will be legitimate, peaceful transitions of power, so on and so forth.
Well, it depends how close the election is. If the election is very close in some of these states, it's going to be chaos. And I don't speak for the president. I don't speak for Mr. Biden. But I believe both of them would agree that there needs to be a sufficient look for the integrity of the election to be protected. And unfortunately, we're turning our elections over to courts because states are rushing forward and suspending state laws, claiming COVID, and they're setting up uncertainty in the election. And I believe it's intentional. I don't believe it's accidental.
Phill Kline, director of the Amistad Project at the Thomas More Society, associate professor of law at Liberty University, and also former attorney general of Kansas. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Gosh darn train. It's a beautiful day out there at Lynchburg, so the train just has to muddy the waters.
I hope to be with you again, and I guarantee you I won't be walking around dodging trains and air conditioning units behind a building to be able to hear you.
I'm sure we will have you back. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Once again, Phill Kline joining us. He is the former Attorney General of Kansas and spearheading the Amistad Project at the Thomas More Society, which once again is spearheading these 8 different state lawsuits. Folks, we have to be able to count on the integrity of our elections. Election integrity is fundamental to the outcome so that voters can trust in the legitimacy of that outcome, can feel faith in the process. And I'm an advocate of the Colorado system of vote by mail. I wasn't originally. I'm a convert, but only because we improved it and we were ready for it. Other states are not. And that should be of deep concern to every American, regardless of where they fall on partisan lines. That is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Next week, we will be joined by, or rather tomorrow, we will be joined by Fahad Nazir, who is the spokesperson for the Saudi Arabian embassy in Washington, D.C. He's going to rejoin us for the third time. We're looking forward to that. Thank you so much for joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thanks to Nathan Matouche, producer extraordinaire, to our partners at the Washington Examiner, to our guest, Phill Kline, and also to you for sharing our content. Have a great day, and may God bless America.